Hi, I'm Lianne Weaver from Beam Development and Training, and welcome to our workshop on Unmasking Imposter Syndrome. Before we get into the workshop, I just want to let you know that if whilst we're going through this, you have any questions or would like any further information, please feel free to contact me. My contact details are at the end. If you'd like any more information about the workshops we deliver, you can also contact me through the same details. I also, throughout this workshop, mention some different authors, different studies. If you'd like further information, I have a full detailed resources list that will give you some suggested books, some reading materials, some videos. If you would like this, again, just get in touch and I will gladly send it across to you. So welcome to our workshop on imposter syndrome. As I say, I'm Lianne Weaver from Beam Development and Training. Beam work with all sorts of organisations all around the world, delivering wellbeing and personal development training. Originally, before the pandemic, we did most of our work face to face, but since the pandemic, we do a lot of our work delivering online workshops and also through the medium of e-learning, for which we work with Nimble to produce amazing e-learning content. If you'd like any information on those, and then feel free to get in touch. But today is all about imposter syndrome. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to first of all understand what imposter syndrome is. We're going to look at what it means and how we can develop imposter syndrome. We're also going to look at how imposter syndrome can change our behaviour, how it affects how we are. And then importantly, I'm going to leave you with some tools and techniques to help you manage imposter syndrome. Now, it's worth saying here that there are two schools of thought with imposter syndrome. Some people believe that you can completely eradicate it, and some people believe that it's something you can absolutely live with, but it may pop up from time to time. I'm definitely of that second school of thought. So the focus for this workshop really is to give you that understanding and then give you tools, assuming that imposter syndrome may pop up from time to time. So imposter syndrome seems to be a buzzword at the moment. It gets thrown around an office quite a lot, but actually it isn't that new. The term was first coined in 1978 by two female researchers called Clance and Imes. And Clance and Imes had significant success. They were academically very successful and professionally. And one day, one of them confided into the other one that they felt like a fraud, that they felt as though their colleagues were more talented, that they felt that they shouldn't be there, they didn't belong, that they felt like an imposter. And amazingly, after making that revelation, the other colleague admitted to feeling the same thing. And Clance and I were really surprised by this because they believed that the other person completely belonged there. And so they started to talk to lots of other women who had considerable achievements, considerable successes, and they seemed to find that this was a running theme. So in 1978, Clance and Imes conducted a study of 150 females, and they found that these women, despite their achievements, despite their successes, didn't experience a sense of internal success, and that they considered themselves to be imposters. At the end of this study, Clance and Imes came up with this term imposter syndrome. And they also came up with the conclusion that imposter syndrome is something that would only be experienced by women. Now, hopefully you can already see an issue with that conclusion. Clance and Imes only looked for imposter syndrome in females, so they were only going to find it in females. The fact is, through further research, we know that imposterism is experienced equally amongst men and women. So it is certainly not a female-only condition. The other issue with the Clance and Imes study is this term, imposter syndrome. It's a term we all know, it's a term that's widely used, but it's actually a bit misleading. To experience feelings of being an imposter is not a syndrome. It is absolutely not a mental health condition. It doesn't appear in the psychiatric handbook. There is nothing fundamentally wrong if we feel like an imposter. And so what you may find is it described as imposter experience or imposter phenomenon. They're all talking about the same thing, but really those terms are more accurate than imposter syndrome. That aside, what Clance and Imes did come up with was 3 defining characteristics of imposterism that are still relevant today. So they found that every single one of their women that experienced it, they found that they had these things in common. So the first was that they believed that other people thought they were better than they were. So I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you're given a responsibility or you're put up for a promotion or you're given an award and you think, why have they given that to me? They must think I'm better than I am. I must have tricked them. There's a fear that you're going to be found out and exposed as a fake. That little voice in your head says you don't belong here. You're a fraud. You're an imposter. And there's also a persistent attribution of success being down to external factors like luck. The problem with that is if we always believe that we only get our success due to luck, then all of our hard work is meaningless. We never acknowledge that we put in that hard work and effort to get there. And that makes it really hard for us to replicate it as well when we need to. So you may be looking at this now thinking, oh my goodness, I tick all 3 of those boxes. I can absolutely relate. Well, the good news is you're in good company. Recent research by someone called Claire Joseph found that more than 70% of us have had feelings of being an imposter. So actually, you're far more likely to be surrounded by other people who think they're an imposter than not. The other thing that we see in research is that imposterism tends to be more prolific the higher up the ladder we go. One of the lies those imposter thoughts tells us is that once I am more qualified, once I'm more experienced, once I am this age, once I've got this qualification, then I'll feel like I belong. But the reality is the higher up the success ladder we get, the more likely we are to feel that we don't belong and to feel like an imposter. And there are actually countless stories of people achieving amazing success who still feel that they don't belong. Now, we looked at how Clance and Imes had originally believed that imposterism was a female-only condition. We know that isn't the case. And we know that imposterism can be experienced by anyone. However, what we also know is that imposterism is likely to be more experienced by certain categories of people. And essentially, we're likely to feel like an imposter anytime we don't believe that we're surrounded by our people, anytime that we feel we don't quite fit in. So we see imposterism much more in academia. In academia, you're surrounded by greatness, you're constantly graded and assessed and compared. So there's that sense that everyone else is better than I am. We see it a lot when people are high flyers, when they've got promoted quickly, when they have done greater things than perhaps you would expect for their age. We see it a lot in lone workers, and this is something that I believe was a contributing factor to seeing it increase during the pandemic. When we work alone, we spend a lot of time assuming and thinking that we know what other people are doing. And we tend to assume and think that everyone else is coping better than us, producing more than us, and achieving more than us. So when we're lone workers or in any format, we tend to be harder on ourselves than we would on other people. We see it in any underrepresented group. So actually with Clance and Imes, females of that level of success in the late 1970s were underrepresented. But that can occur in any situation now. We see imposterism a lot more in the LGBTQ plus community. We see it a lot more with people who are neurodiverse. We see it in creatives. People who are creative put their heart and soul into something and put it out into the world for other people to assess and judge it. If you're a first generation professional, if your family were traditionally more blue collar workers and you've now become a white collar worker, you might feel that you're not amongst your own people. We see it a lot with self-employed people, which is very similar to the same reason for lone workers. We're on our own, we're isolated, we don't feel we're achieving fast enough. And then anyone who's taken an atypical route into their career, if you've somehow gone into a career that normally needs a degree and you haven't got a degree, or if you have been fast tracked, then you may feel that you don't belong. Essentially, what we know about imposterism is we're going to feel like an imposter when we look around and we don't feel that our people are around us. And that in part explains why when we climb further and further up the ladder, we're likely to feel more of an imposter. Now, research has found that whenever we start to feel like an imposter, it starts to change our behavior. And this is really interesting because we're not always aware of this happening. We're aware of the internal dialogue, but we're not aware that it changes how we interact with the world. In Claire Jose's research, she found that imposter syndrome is known to cause what she calls the 4 Ps of imposter syndrome. So it can make us perfectionists, believing that everything we have to put out into the world has to be perfect, constantly criticizing ourselves before anyone else could possibly do it, stopping ourselves from putting something out into the world because we're scared of other people judging us, fearful of rejection, fearful of failure, fearful of not being good enough. So we hide under this illusion of perfectionism. Now, a fantastic quote that I'll paraphrase here, but I always think of with perfectionism, comes from Abraham Maslow. And Abraham Maslow said, "There have been billions of human beings to ever walk this planet. Not one of them has ever been perfect. So why do you think you need to be the first one?" The fact is, just purely as a human being, we are imperfect. We have flaws, we make mistakes, we don't always measure up. When we can embrace and accept that part of ourselves, imposter syndrome isn't as active. Procrastination. We put things off again for the fear of them not being good enough, for other people judging us, for us being seen by other people. We just hope things will go away and someone else will do it and they won't ever come back to us. Paralysis. Being so scared of being found out that we just freeze in the moment. We might not seize opportunities. We might stay quiet in the hope of us not having that light shone upon us. And then a really common one we see with imposter syndrome is people pleasing. We feel such a fraud and are so scared of being found out that we go out of our way to be everything to everyone, constantly trying to please everyone for the fear of someone not liking us and then realizing we don't belong. Now, as I'm sure you're aware, just listening to this, every one of these conditions is exhausting. But if you're struggling with imposterism, the chances are you experience all 4 of these, which results in us feeling exhausted, which results in us not interacting to the best of our ability, not taking opportunities. It has a huge impact on how we perform both in the office and at home. And that research has been taken a step further where we can see how these behaviours start to have real life impact in the office. So Claire Joseph found that 60% of people with imposterism put off important projects. They just delay it and delay it and delay it, hoping it'll go away. Now, not only can you use this information to think about yourself, but maybe think about other people you work with. You might have a colleague that infuriates you because they always procrastinate. They're always putting things off. Actually, what that behavior really reveals is that they're fearful. They're scared that they won't measure up. They're scared that what they're putting out there isn't quite good enough. 50% of those suffering with imposterism don't speak up with their ideas. If you've ever had that scenario where you're in a group meeting and you think, oh, I'm going to mention that, and then you think, no, I won't. That's silly. They'll laugh at me. And you stay quiet, and a minute or two later, someone else says the exact same idea, and you think, oh, why didn't I say something? If you're a team leader, a manager, business owner, and you have people in your company who are struggling with imposterism, how many amazing ideas are you missing out on hearing just for their fear of being heard? 48% of people with imposter syndrome strike off their successes as just luck. I was lucky, it was a fluke, it was just a good day. As I mentioned at the beginning, there's a real danger with that. If I always believe my success is down to luck, then it's difficult for me to replicate that. So if I go to an interview and I get a job and I tell myself I just got it because I was lucky, the next time I have an interview, how do I replicate it? Whereas when I recognize that my successes are often down to my hard work, I can replicate that. I have something to work with. And 46% turn down golden opportunities. As we've said, that reluctance to take the promotion, that reluctance to speak up in a meeting, that reluctance to take further responsibility. So actually, what we may not have been aware of is imposterism isn't just affecting you and how you interact, but it's affecting our workplace as a whole. And if we could manage imposterism better, our workplaces would be more productive, more creative, more outspoken. They would bubble with ideas and excitement. So we're going to spend the rest of this workshop looking at how we can befriend that inner imposter, how we can acknowledge that it exists, and how we can then use that existence as a way of moving forward with some of these really useful, powerful tools. So the first step is acknowledging that you have an inner imposter. Just acknowledge that he or she exists, and then acknowledge that they are likely to appear. And the time that your imposter is likely to appear is anytime you are out of your comfort zone. Anytime you feel uncomfortable, anytime you feel seen, anytime you feel that all eyes are on you, your imposter voice is likely to appear and try and get you to just hide back into safety. So if you've been doing the same job for 10 years and you're really comfortable in your job, the chances are you won't have felt like an imposter very much. And this is where I think that sometimes we can think when we don't have imposter syndrome, sometimes we can think that we've overcome it and it's disappeared. But the reality is, if we're in our comfort zone, there's no need for our imposter syndrome voice to speak up. But the second you're pushed out of that comfort zone, if you're asked to go for a promotion, take on new staff, take on new responsibility, if that imposterism is there, then that's when it's likely to speak up. So acknowledge that I must be out of my comfort zone because I'm starting to feel a bit of an imposter. Notice and name your imposter. So this comes from amazing research. Two key bits of research that I would refer you to. One comes from someone called Matthew Lieberman. And Matthew Lieberman in 2007 had people undergo a study where they were experiencing difficult emotions. And whilst they were experiencing those difficult emotions, he had them under an fMRI scan, which shows where all of the activity goes on our brain. And he found that if they were experiencing a difficult emotion, their limbic region would really light up, which showed that essentially their brain was preparing to fight or flight. They were no longer in their rational brain, they were in their irrational survival brain. Then he got people to experience that same difficult emotion, but this time he got them to notice and name it. And as they noticed and named what emotion they were feeling, he noticed the activity moved from that survival part of the brain into the prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking, critical thinking part of the brain. It made them calmer, it lowered their cortisol levels, and it enabled them to deal with difficult emotions. So his advice is simply any time that we're dealing with a difficult emotion, notice and name it. Another bit of research, which is very, very similar, comes from an amazing neuropsychologist called Daniel Siegelman. And Dan Siegelman found exactly the same symptoms, but he described it as name it to tame it. So if we feel an emotion is kind of overpowering us, it's taking over, name it, and we start to calm it. So that technique is really useful for imposter syndrome, because really what imposter syndrome wants to do is to kind of control our behavior to stop us from doing anything that shines a light on us. If we can notice and name it, we can go back into our calm, rational brain, and it's no longer controlling us. Incredibly simple and basic, but breathe. Our breath is the biggest signal we have that tells our brain whether our environment is safe or dangerous. We take about 25,000 breaths a day, and pretty much most of those are completely subconscious. You may not have even been aware of a single breath you've already taken today, but you know you've taken them because you're here. So even though you may not consciously be aware of your breath, every single breath you take does tell your brain how you're feeling. Now, if we're nice and calm and relaxed, our breathing is slow, it's deep, hopefully it's all nose focused, and that tells our brain that we're safe, and so the brain is nice and calm. If, however, all of a sudden someone burst into the room that you didn't know, you would change your breathing before you'd even processed what that meant. So you'd go, take a big gasp, hold your breath, and then go into short, shallow, rapid breathing. The brain immediately picks up on this, recognizes that this signals that our environment is dangerous, and then starts to prepare us to fight or flight. So we start to have a rush of adrenaline and cortisol, our heart rate increases, our blood pressure increases. Now, this is really effective if we are in a life or death situation. But this happens anytime we feel threatened, even if rationally we know it's not a life or death situation. So if I'm about to give a presentation, rationally, I know that's not a life or death situation. But if I feel anxious about it, my breathing will go into that short, shallow, rapid stress breathing, and my brain will believe this is life or death, causing me to want to run away, causing me to be irrational, causing me to just want it over as quickly as possible. And this is happening within our body all the time, 24/7. So you can pay attention right now as you're listening to me to where your breath is coming from right in this moment. And if your breath is coming from the upper part of your chest, this signals that you're in a stress state. Even if mentally you don't think you are, that's what your brain will be picking up from breathing up here. We breathe in our upper chest when we're stressed. When we're relaxed, we breathe from our lower lungs, which engages the diaphragm. So in order for us to calm ourselves down when we're starting to have these imposter thoughts, we can tune into our breathing. So the basic rules for breathing to calm any difficult emotion, but we're talking about imposterism here, is to just pause, notice and name what's going on, then take in a nice deep breath through the nose. Always through the nose, never the mouth. Your mouth is designed for eating and talking. Your nose is designed for breathing. And we don't want to do a great big gasp. Lots of times when people tell you to take a deep breath when you're upset or something, they kind of over exaggerate it. We want to take a controlled, calm breath. And by controlling the breath, we start to control the mind. So we take in a controlled breath through the nose, deep into the lower lungs, so we're engaging that diaphragm. So in through the nose, into the lower lungs. And if you're feeling stressed or anxious, which imposterism will no doubt do to you, make sure your exhale is slightly longer than your inhale. So you can even count it. You can breathe in for the count of 4, hold, out for 6. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. That simple tool will help calm your brain anytime that you are feeling stressed, anxious, emotionally hijacked in any way. The next is to turn fear into excitement. So this is fascinating. Whenever we feel anxious, or excited, we have exactly the same physiological response. So when that's measured, exactly the same thing happens in our body for both emotions. The only thing that changes that is how we interpret it. Fritz Perls, the creator of Gestalt therapy, said fear is excitement minus the breath. Fear is excitement minus the breath. Essentially, what he means is that when we start to feel fearful, it's the same physiological response as excitement, but we forget to breathe. We go into that stress state. We're no longer mindful. We're stuck in our heads. We're not tuned into what our body's doing. When we're excited, we're mindful. We're in that moment. We're enjoying it. We feel the pleasure and our breathing is more relaxed. So anytime you start to feel scared, if you say to yourself, I'm excited, your body and brain actually don't know the difference. The only way they know the difference is by whatever you tell it. So you can start to turn your fears into excitement in any opportunity. So if you're going for that job interview, if you're going for that big contract, if you're going on that hot date, I'm excited. And then you can start to feel more in control and manage that in a much better way for you. And the last thing is to be more honest. When we have imposterism, the lie that it most commonly tells us is they're going to find you out. And so we stay living ashamed of ourselves. We stay living in fear of being found out. What I'm suggesting to you is if more than 70% of us are feeling like that, start telling people. Because the minute you start saying to people, oh yeah, I get that imposterism sometimes, then it's not going to have that same power and control over you. It can't make you worry about being found out if you're already telling people that that happens for you. It takes away all of that power and it puts you back in the driving seat instead of that imposter voice. So really lovely 5 simple tools and techniques that you can start using today, immediately. No one else really needs to know that you're using them, but they will help you start to be more in control of it. So that is our whistle-stop tour of imposter syndrome. We've covered a lot today, and I know that it's really fast, and this is a way bigger topic than what we're just dipping our toe in right now, but it's hopefully given you enough to get you to understand it. So remember that imposter syndrome is experienced by more than 70% of us. If you have it, you're in really good company. We don't all experience it in the same way. So for some, it might make us procrastinate. For some, it might make us a perfectionist. It's different for all of us, and it varies at different times in our life as well. It can impact our behavior with those 4 Ps. And then we looked at, importantly, how we can befriend our inner imposter so that we acknowledge anytime I'm out of my comfort zone, it is going to appear. We notice and name it. We use that technique to feel more in control. We manage our breathing, so we're no longer telling our brain that we're in a life or death situation. We turn our fear into excitement. I am excited. And we're honest about it with everyone else. Thank you so much for listening to this workshop. I really hope it's given you some food for thought. I hope it's helped you. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you have any questions, my email address is there. If you want the resources list or any information about any of the courses, e-learning or otherwise that we deliver at Beam, please feel free to get in touch through any of the mediums shown. Have a lovely rest of the day. Thank you.